Tonight we leave the world of noise and light behind and step into the cold mists of the ancient north. We walk where frost clings to the branches and where the night sky stretches endless and clear. We're venturing into Norse mythology, into the halls of Asgard, where gods feast and fight, where oaths are sacred and honor is everything. This is the story of Tyr, the god of war and justice, the one-handed deity, the god who gave everything for order, for law, for the survival of the cosmos itself. If this kind of storytelling brings you peace, if you find comfort in these old tales told slowly, feel free to like the video and subscribe. And in the comments, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is right now. It's always oddly comforting to know who else is out there, drifting off to the same quiet story, scattered across time zones and continents, connected by myths thousands of years old. So settle in. Dim the lights if you haven't already. Let your breathing slow. Close your eyes if you wish. And let's begin with a god whose name itself means God, a deity older than most, whose sacrifice echoes through the ages. This is Tyr. This is his story. Picture, if you will, the great hall of Asgard. Golden light spills from windows carved into walls of gleaming stone. Inside, gods gather around long tables. Odin sits at the head, his one eye watchful, his ravens perched nearby. Thor laughs too loudly, his hammer resting against his chair. Loki weaves through the crowd, whispering something clever and probably dangerous. Freya moves with grace that makes mortals weep. Heimdall stands guard, ever vigilant. And there, somewhat apart from the revelry, stands Tyr. He is not small, he is not weak. He stands tall, broad-shouldered, a warrior through and through. But something sets him apart from the others. It is not just his missing hand, though that is impossible to ignore. It is something in his bearing, a quietness, a gravity. Where Thor embodies the storm, where Odin crackles with cunning, where Loki dances with chaos, Tyr simply is, steady, unwavering, like bedrock beneath turbulent seas. His right arm ends at the wrist or perhaps the forearm, depending on which telling you trust. The stump is clean, long-healed, but the absence is profound. For a god of war to lose his sword hand is to lose part of his very essence. Yet Tyr does not rage about it. He does not complain. He carries the loss with the same quiet dignity he carries everything else. The Norse did not worship weakness. They admired strength, courage, the ability to face down death without flinching. So why would they venerate a one-handed god? Why would warriors call upon someone who could no longer grip a blade properly? Because Tyr's strength was never merely physical. His courage was not the courage of the battlefield alone, though he possessed that too. No, Tyr embodied something the ancient Norse valued perhaps even more highly than raw power. He embodied law, order, the willingness to sacrifice oneself not for glory, not for songs sung in mead halls, but for the simple necessity of keeping the cosmos from collapsing into chaos. And he lost his hand, making sure an oath was honored, even when that oath bound one of the most terrible creatures in all the 9 worlds. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand Tyr, to truly grasp who he is and what he means, we must go back. Back before the Viking Age. Back before even the Germanic peoples had become distinct. Back to when languages were still forming and gods were still finding their names. Names have power, the ancient peoples knew this. To name something is to define it, to give it shape and meaning. And Tyr's name is perhaps one of the most significant in all of mythology, because Tyr's name means God. Not a god, not God of something specific, just God, the word itself. In Proto-Germanic, the language spoken thousands of years ago by the ancestors of the Norse, the word was Tiwaz. It meant deity, divinity, the holy and the powerful. And from this same root came the names of gods across the Indo-European world. Zeus in Greek, Jupiter in Latin, which comes from Dies Pater, meaning Sky Father, Dyaus in the ancient Vedic texts of India. All variations on the same ancient theme, all descending from the Proto-Indo-European Dyaus, the shining sky, the father of gods and men. And think about that for a moment. Tyr's name connects him linguistically to Zeus, king of Olympus, to Jupiter, lord of Rome, to Dyaus, the Vedic sky father. These are not minor deities relegated to the footnotes of their respective pantheons. These are, or were, the supreme gods, the rulers, the ultimate authorities. And this tells us something crucial. Tyr was not always as we find him in the later Viking Age stories, diminished and quiet in the shadow of Odin and Thor. Once, long ago, he may have been the chief god himself, the All-Father before there was an All-Father. The Sky-Father of the Germanic peoples, looking down from the bright heavens, ensuring order and justice, witnessing oaths, granting victory. But something changed. Over the centuries, as the Germanic religion evolved and transformed, as tribes moved and cultures shifted, Odin rose to prominence. Odin, the Wanderer. Odin, the wise and terrible. Odin, the gallows god, who hung himself from the world tree to learn the secrets of the runes. Odin, who collected the slain in Valhalla, who whispered prophecies and wove fates. And as Odin ascended, Tyr's star dimmed. Not extinguished, not forgotten, but certainly diminished. By the time the Eddas were written down in the 13th century by Icelandic scholars trying to preserve the old stories, Tyr had become a secondary figure. Important, yes, respected, absolutely, but no longer the center of the cosmos, yet his name remained. And names remember what people forget. In Old English, he was Tiw. In Old High German, Zew. In Gothic, Tis. Always variations on the same theme, always carrying that weight of divinity, of godhood itself. The Romans, when they encountered Germanic peoples, recognized in Tyr a god worthy of respect. They called him Mars, their own god of war, and the equation stuck. Tuesday in English comes from Tuesday, the day sacred to Tyr. In other Germanic languages, the pattern holds. Tisdager in Old Norse, Tirsdag in Danish, Tisdag in Swedish. So every week, when Tuesday rolls around and you go about your day, you are speaking the name of an ancient god. You are invoking, however unknowingly, a deity older than the written word, a god who once stood at the pinnacle of the divine hierarchy. And what did this god represent? What did the Sky-Father, the one whose name meant God itself, embody? War, yes, but not war as mindless slaughter. Justice, certainly, but not justice as cold legalism. Tyr represented something more fundamental. He represented the order that allows civilization to exist, the contracts between people that must be honored, the oaths that bind communities together, the law that prevents society from descending into everyone against everyone. In the harsh world of the ancient North, where winters were brutal and survival was never guaranteed, these things mattered desperately. A broken oath could mean death. A failed harvest could wipe out a village. The only thing standing between humanity and oblivion was the collective agreement to work together, to follow certain rules, to uphold certain standards, and Tyr was the divine embodiment of that principle. He was the god who ensured oaths were kept, who presided over the Thing, the ancient Germanic assembly where freemen gathered to make laws and settle disputes, who granted victory to those whose cause was just, not merely to the strongest. This is why paradoxically the god of war was also the god of law. Because for the Norse and their Germanic ancestors, war and law were two sides of the same coin. Both were ways of resolving disputes. Both required courage and honor, and both ultimately served the same purpose, maintaining the order that kept chaos at bay. Their legal assembly, a thing, was not so different from a battlefield. Both were places where conflicts were brought into the open and resolved. Both required warriors, men willing to stand up and fight for what they believed was right, whether with words or with swords. And both were overseen by Tyr, the god who had given up his own hand to ensure that the cosmic order would hold. War has many faces. The ancient peoples understood this better than we might today. War is not just one thing. It is strategy and chaos, discipline and frenzy, honor and betrayal. And different gods embodied different aspects of warfare. Among the Norse, there were three primary war gods, and each represented a distinct element of battle. Thor, the Thunderer, embodied raw physical might. He was the bruising, brutal clash of shield walls, the breaking of bones, the roar of combat. When Thor went to war, mountains shook. His was the war of strength, of endurance, of simply overpowering your enemy through sheer force. Odin represented something else entirely. He was the god of strategy, of cunning, of the psychological and magical dimensions of warfare. Odin was the battle frenzy, the inspiration that seized warriors and made them fight beyond their limits. He was the whispered tactic that turned defeat into victory, the sudden realization of your enemy's weakness. Odin was trickery and wisdom, foresight and manipulation. He won wars before the first blow was struck. And then there was Tyr. Tyr was neither the brute nor the trickster. Tyr represented the legal framework of warfare, the rules of engagement, the oaths sworn before battle, the judgment that declared which side fought justly. He was the formalities of war, the treaties, the contracts between armies, the laws that governed when and how one could fight. This distinction is crucial. Among the Greeks, Ares was the god of war's bloodlust, the frenzy and rage and mindless violence of battle. He was not particularly respected. Even Zeus, his own father, called him hateful. The Greeks preferred Athena, goddess of strategic warfare, who represented skill and intelligence in combat. Tyr was neither Ares nor Athena, though he had elements of both. He was uniquely Germanic, representing a culture that saw no contradiction between being a fierce warrior and being bound by honor and law. In fact, the two were inseparable. A true warrior fought not just with strength but with righteousness. He upheld his oaths. He fought fairly by the rules agreed upon. Victory without honor was no victory at all. The Romans noticed this. When they encountered Germanic tribes and tried to make sense of their gods through the lens of their own pantheon, they looked at Tyr and saw Mars. But not just any Mars. The inscriptions left by Roman soldiers of Germanic origin sometimes call him Mars Thingsus, Mars of the Thing, Mars of the Assembly. Think about that epithet for a moment. Mars of the Assembly, the war god who presides over legal proceedings. It sounds almost contradictory to modern ears. We tend to separate the courtroom from the battlefield, the lawyer from the soldier. But the ancient Germanic peoples did not make this distinction. The Thing was a place where laws were made and disputes were settled, yes, but it was also a place where men went armed, where disagreements could and did end in legal duels, where the judgment of the assembly had the force of divine law behind it. And Tyr was the god of all of it, the god who ensured that when you swore an oath you meant it, that when you accepted a judgment, you abided by it, that when you challenged someone to combat, you fought by the rules. This is why warriors invoked him before battle. Not necessarily for strength, Thor could provide that. Not necessarily for cunning, Odin had that covered. They invoked Tyr for something else, for the assurance that their cause was just, for the knowledge that if they fought honorably and kept their oaths, victory would favor them, for the divine sanction that made warfare something other than mere murder. In the Poetic Edda, in a poem called Sigurdrifumal, a Valkyrie teaches the hero Sigurd about runes of victory. She tells him to carve victory runes on his sword and call twice upon Tyr. Not on Thor for strength, not on Odin for cunning, on Tyr. Because Tyr was the god who granted victory to those who deserved it, to those who fought with honor and justice on their side. Archaeological evidence supports this. Weapons have been found, swords and spears, with Tyr's rune carved into them. The Tiwaz rune, shaped like an upward-pointing arrow, symbol of the god and of the qualities he embodied. Warriors literally carried Tyr into battle with them, etched into the very tools of war. But these were not berserkers seeking only bloodshed. These were warriors who believed in something more, in a code, in honor, in the idea that warfare, while brutal and terrible, could still be conducted justly, that even in the chaos of battle, law and order mattered. And Tyr, the one-handed god, watched over them, silent, steadfast, ensuring that even in war, the bonds that held society together would not completely fray. Before we delve deeper into Tyr's role as guardian of law, we should pause and consider the world he inhabited, the cosmos as the Norse understood it, because Tyr did not exist in isolation. He was part of a great web of interconnected realms, all held together by the world tree Yggdrasil, and all governed by complex relationships between gods, giants, dwarves, elves, and mortals. The Norse cosmos was not a single unified place. It was 9 worlds, 9 realms, each with its own character, its own inhabitants, its own rules. At the center, or perhaps at the top, depending on how you visualize the structure, was Asgard, the realm of the Æsir, the warrior gods. This was where Tyr lived, where the great halls stood, where Valhalla received the honored dead. Asgard was connected to Midgard, the world of humans, by Bifrost, the rainbow bridge. Heimdall guarded this bridge, ever watchful, able to hear grass growing and see for hundreds of miles. The bridge was beautiful but fragile. During Ragnarok, it would shatter under the weight of the fire giants, but for now it stood, a shimmering arc of color, linking the divine and the mortal. Midgard itself was the middle realm, not the highest, not the lowest, the place where humans lived and died, where they built their halls and farmed their fields and told stories about the gods who lived above them. Midgard was encircled by a vast ocean, and in that ocean lived Jormungandr, the world serpent, whose coils were so immense he wrapped around the entire world and grasped his own tail in his jaws. Below Midgard, or perhaps beside it in the great tree's roots, lay Hel's realm, the land of the dead who died without glory. Not a place of punishment exactly, not the Christian hell despite the similar name, just cold, grey, quiet. A place where those who died of sickness or age went to wait out eternity. Hel herself, half living and half corpse, ruled there with neither cruelty nor kindness. She simply was, like death itself. Then there was Jotunheim, the land of the giants, the Jotnar, the ancient enemies of the gods, though enemy is perhaps too simple a word. The relationship between gods and giants was complicated. They fought, yes, they killed each other, but they also intermarried, formed alliances, made bargains. Many gods had giant blood in their lineage. Odin's mother was a giantess. Thor spent much of his time in Jotunheim, fighting giants, but also occasionally befriending them. The line between god and giant was not as clear as the myths sometimes make it seem. Svartalfheim was the realm of the dwarves, master craftsmen who worked in forges deep beneath the mountains. They created wonders: Mjolnir, Thor's hammer; Gungnir, Odin's spear; Gleipnir, the ribbon that bound Fenrir. The dwarves understood the fundamental forces of creation in ways even the gods did not. They worked with materials that should not exist and forged things that defied possibility. Halfheim, realm of the light elves; Vanaheim, home of the Vanir gods, the other tribe of deities who had once warred with the Æsir, but now lived in uneasy peace. Muspelheim, the realm of fire, where Surtur waited with his flaming sword for the day when he would burn the world. Niflheim, the realm of ice and mist, primordial and cold. 9 worlds, 9 realms, all connected by Yggdrasil, the great ash tree that stood at the center of everything. Yggdrasil's roots dug deep into the primordial wells. Its trunk supported the realms. Its branches stretched up into the heavens, and in its boughs and roots lived creatures. An eagle perched at the top, a dragon gnawed at the roots, a squirrel ran up and down the trunk, carrying insults between eagle and dragon, keeping ancient feuds alive. Yggdrasil was more than a tree. It was the structure of reality itself. When the tree shook, worlds trembled, and at Ragnarok, when everything fell apart, some believed even Yggdrasil would perish, though others said it would endure, sheltering the few survivors who would rebuild in the aftermath. This was the cosmos Tyr protected. Not just Asgard, not just the gods, all of it. The entire complex, interconnected web of existence. Because law and order were not just human concerns or even divine concerns. They were cosmic principles. The universe itself operated according to certain rules. Day followed night, seasons turned. The dead went to their appointed places. Oaths had power, contracts bound. And Tyr was the embodiment of those rules. He represented the idea that there was an order to things, a right way for the cosmos to function. When that order was threatened, when chaos crept in, when someone or something tried to break the fundamental rules, Tyr stood against it. This is what made Fenrir so dangerous. The wolf was not just physically threatening, he represented the breakdown of order itself. He was chaos incarnate, a creature of such power and hunger that he could tear down the carefully maintained structure of existence. And Tyr, in binding him, was not just preventing his own death or the deaths of other gods, he was preserving the cosmos itself. The ancient Norse understood that order was fragile. They lived in a world where nature could kill you, where winter lasted months and food ran short, where a bad year meant starvation, where a raid could destroy everything you had built. The only thing that kept society functioning, that kept people alive, was cooperation, rules, laws, the mutual agreement to work together rather than tear each other apart. And they projected this understanding onto the cosmos. They imagined that the gods faced the same struggle on a grander scale, that the universe itself was constantly threatened by forces of chaos, by giants and monsters and entropy, and that the gods, particularly gods like Tyr, worked constantly to maintain order, to keep everything from falling apart. In this context, Tyr's sacrifice of his hand was not just a personal loss, it was a cosmic necessity. The price paid to maintain the structure of reality, and Tyr paid it willingly, knowing that someone had to, knowing that if he did not, everything would unravel. The Norse did not see their gods as omnipotent. The gods could be killed. They could fail. They were in many ways just very powerful beings trying their best to keep things running, and Ragnarok was the ultimate proof of this. The gods would eventually lose. Chaos would win. The cosmos would end in fire and ice. But even knowing this, even knowing that their efforts were ultimately doomed, the gods kept trying. They kept upholding order. They kept fighting. And that, perhaps more than anything else, is what made them heroic. Not that they were guaranteed to win, but that they fought anyway, that they did their duty even knowing it was futile in the long run, that they maintained order not because it would last forever, but because it was the right thing to do for as long as possible. Tyr embodied this most fully. He knew Fenrir would eventually break free. The prophecies were clear. At Ragnarok, Gleipnir would snap, the wolf would run, Odin would be devoured, and Tyr himself would die fighting Garmr. He knew all of this, and he bound Fenrir anyway. He gave up his hand anyway, because the alternative was letting the chaos happen now, immediately, and delaying the end, preserving order for even a little longer, was worth any cost. This is the world Tyr lived in. This is the cosmic drama he was part of, and understanding this context makes his actions even more significant. He was not just a war god or a law god, he was a cosmic guardian, a deity who stood at the boundary between order and chaos and held the line, knowing full well that the line would not hold forever, but holding it anyway. To understand Tyr fully, we must understand the thing. And to understand the thing, we must step back and imagine what justice looked like in the ancient North. There were no kings with absolute power, at least not in the early days. There were no professional judges sitting in robes, interpreting elaborate legal codes. Law was not something handed down from on high by a distant authority. Law was something created by and for the community, by free men gathering together to discuss, debate, and decide. The thing, in its various forms across the Germanic and Norse world, was this gathering. It was part legislative assembly, part court, part social occasion. Men would come from surrounding areas, sometimes traveling for days to attend the thing. They would bring their disputes, their grievances, their proposals for new laws, and together as a community, they would hash it out. These were not gentle proceedings. There were no guarantees of safety. Men came armed, passions ran high, insults were traded. Sometimes violence erupted despite the sacred nature of the gathering, but the thing itself, the institution, the idea of it, was holy. It was the place where order was maintained, where chaos was kept at bay through the collective will of free men to abide by agreed-upon rules. And Tyr presided over this. Not physically present, perhaps, though who can say for certain what the ancient peoples believed about the presence of their gods, but spiritually, symbolically, Tyr was there. Every oath sworn at the thing was sworn in his name. Every judgment rendered was rendered under his watchful eye. Every decision to abide by the law rather than resorting to blood feud was a choice made in honor of what Tyr represented. The thing was not just about resolving disputes. It was about preventing them from destroying society. In a world without a strong central government, without police or armies to enforce order, the only thing keeping people from constant warfare with each other was the mutual agreement to follow the law. And that mutual agreement, that social contract, was sacred. To break an oath sworn at the thing was to commit one of the gravest sins imaginable. You became an oath breaker, a nithing, a person without honor, worthy only of exile or death. Tyr was the guarantor of all this. When you swore an oath in his name, you were calling upon the god of law himself to witness it, and if you broke that oath, you were not just betraying your fellow men. You were betraying a god. This connection between war and law makes more sense when you understand the thing. Legal disputes were settled there, yes, but they were settled by the judgment of armed men, by the threat of force if necessary. If two parties could not come to an agreement, the thing might sanction a holmgang, a legal duel. Two men, equal weapons, fighting until one yielded or died. The outcome was seen as the judgment of the gods themselves, Tyr's judgment. This is why the god of law was also the god of war. Because law in the ancient Germanic world was backed by the credible threat of violence. Not arbitrary violence, not the violence of a tyrant doing as he pleased, but sanctioned, legal, ritualized violence. Violence with rules, violence in service of order. And this was Tyr's domain, the space where law and war intersected, where oaths mattered as much as swords, where honor was not just a pleasant abstraction, but a matter of life and death. Scholar Georges Dumézil, a French scholar of comparative religion, wrote extensively about the Indo-European gods and their functions. He placed Tyr firmly in what he called the first function, the realm of sovereignty, law, and religious authority. Along with Odin, though in a different aspect, Tyr represented the legal and contractual elements that allowed society to function. Dumézil argued that Tyr's sacrifice of his hand was not just a heroic act, it was a legal act. When the gods bound Fenrir with trickery, they were technically committing fraud. They had promised the wolf he could trust them, and then they betrayed that promise. Without Tyr's sacrifice, without him willingly paying the price for that broken trust, the binding of Fenrir would have been, in Dumézil's words, pure fraud. But Tyr's hand made it legal. He regularized it. He paid the cost. He transformed a dishonorable act into a necessary sacrifice. And in doing so, he preserved not just the lives of the gods, but the very concept of law itself. Because even the gods, even in their desperation to save the cosmos, could not simply ignore the rules. There had to be a price. Oaths had to be honored, even if the honoring cost terribly. Tyr paid that price, and in paying it he demonstrated the core principle of his nature. Law was not negotiable. Order was not optional. The rules mattered, even when, especially when, following them hurt. This is the god warriors prayed to. This is the deity who presided over the thing. Not a god of arbitrary power, not a god who could be bribed or flattered or tricked, but a god of iron principle. A god who understood that civilization rested on keeping one's word, no matter the cost. And soon we will see just how much that cost could be. Before we can understand Tyr's greatest sacrifice, we must understand what he was sacrificing himself for. And to do that, we must speak of Loki. And more specifically, we must speak of Loki's children. Loki, the trickster god, shapeshifter, troublemaker, blood brother to Odin himself, sworn in an ancient pact sealed with mingled blood. Loki was never quite one of the Æsir, never fully trusted, never entirely safe. But he was useful, clever, quick-thinking. He had gotten the gods out of as many jams as he'd gotten them into. The gods needed him even if they did not quite like him. But Loki, as gods and mortals alike tended to do in Norse myth, had a complicated love life. His wife was Sigyn, loyal to him even unto the bitterest end. But Loki also dallied with a giantess named Angerboda, whose name means she who brings grief. And from this union, from this mingling of trickster god and grief-bringing giantess, came 3 children who would shape the fate of the cosmos. The first was Jormungandr, the world serpent, a snake of such monstrous size that it would eventually grow to encircle the entire world, grasping its own tail in its jaws, a living barrier between the realm of mortals and the churning seas beyond. Jormungandr would be Thor's nemesis, their final battle at Ragnarok ending in mutual destruction. The second was Hel, half-living, half-corpse daughter of death. Her realm was the underworld, the grey and misty place where those who died of sickness or old age went. Not Valhalla, not glory, but a quiet, cold eternity. Hel was neither cruel nor kind. She simply was. Inevitable. Inescapable. Death personified. And the third child was Fenrir. Fenrir the wolf. Fenrir, who would grow and grow until he was large enough to swallow the sun itself. Fenrir, who was destined, according to every prophecy Odin had ever heard, to devour the All-Father at the end of all things. When the gods learned of Loki's monstrous offspring, they did what gods in their fear and pride so often do. They acted rashly. They decided these creatures were too dangerous to be left to their own devices. So Odin himself led a band of gods to Jotunheim, the land of the giants, to Angerboda's hall where the three strange children lived. Jormungandr, the serpent, was grabbed and hurled into the sea. The god-king threw the snake as far and as hard as he could, and Jormungandr fell into the ocean encircling Midgard. There he would remain, growing larger over the centuries, until he was so massive that sailors could mistake him for a chain of islands. And there he would stay until Ragnarok, when he would rise from the depths to poison the sky with his venom. Hel was cast into Niflheim, the realm of ice and mist and death. There she would rule, queen of the dishonored dead, keeper of those who died without glory. She would remain there, neither hostile nor helpful, until the end. And when Ragnarok came, she would open the gates and let her subjects march to battle alongside the forces of destruction. But Fenrir was different. Fenrir was only a pup, small enough that the gods thought they could control him. And perhaps they were curious. Perhaps Odin, in his hunger for knowledge, wanted to observe this creature, to see if the prophecies could be averted. Perhaps they simply underestimated him. Or perhaps, darkest of all, they wanted to keep their enemy close, to watch him grow, to study him so that when the time came to bind him, they would understand what they were dealing with. Whatever the reason, they brought Fenrir back to Asgard. They kept him there among the shining halls of the gods where they could watch him, where they could feed him, where they could try to gentle him, though whether they truly believed they could gentle such a creature, or whether they were simply buying time, is unclear. At first, Fenrir was almost adorable. Yes, he was the son of Loki, conceived in the wild lands of Jotunheim with the giantess who brought grief. But as a pup, he was small enough to fit in a god's arms. His fur was soft. His eyes, though already unusually bright, had not yet developed that unsettling glow. He played like any young wolf might play, tumbling and wrestling with imaginary prey. Some of the younger gods, those less burdened by prophecy and foreboding, found him charming in those early days. They would watch him chase his tail in the courtyards of Asgard. They would laugh when he tried to pounce on things far too large for him to tackle. He was, after all, just a baby. But babies grow, and Fenrir grew faster than any natural wolf ever could. Within weeks, he was the size of a hunting hound. His paws had doubled, then tripled in size. His milk teeth fell out, replaced by adult fangs that gleamed like polished ivory. When he yawned, the gods could see down a throat that seemed to go on forever, into darkness that had no end. Within months he was larger than any earthly wolf. He stood as tall as a horse. His shoulders were broad and muscled. When he ran, the ground trembled. When he howled, and he did howl sometimes, calling out to something or someone none of the gods could see, the sound carried across all of Asgard and beyond, a lonely and terrible cry that made even brave warriors reach for their weapons. The gods began to worry. Odin convened councils. They discussed what to do about the wolf. Some suggested killing him outright, but this was dismissed immediately. Asgard was sacred ground. To spill blood there, especially the blood of one they had brought into their halls as a guest of sorts, would be an unforgivable pollution. It would violate the very laws they claimed to uphold. Others suggested casting him out, sending him back to Jotunheim or perhaps to some remote wilderness where he could roam without threatening anyone. But this too was rejected. If they set Fenrir free, they would lose track of him. He could grow without constraint. He could become even more dangerous. And when Ragnarok came, as the prophecies said it would, he would be completely wild, completely uncontrolled, with no connection to Asgard, no reason to show any mercy or restraint whatsoever. So they kept him. They kept him close, they watched him, and they worried. Fenrir, for his part, seemed content enough in those middle days. He was well fed. He had space to roam within the confines set for him. He was, as far as anyone could tell, not unhappy. But there was something in his eyes, even then. A knowing, an awareness. He was Loki's son, after all. Cunning ran in his blood. and he watched the gods watching him with an intelligence that made them deeply uncomfortable. Most of the Æsir stayed away from Fenrir. They fed him by throwing great slabs of meat from a distance, huge haunches of elk and oxen, whole deer, anything to satisfy his ever-growing appetite. They watched him from the safety of doorways and windows. They muttered among themselves about what to do when he grew too large, too dangerous. Some of them started having nightmares about the wolf, dreams where his jaws opened wide enough to swallow the sun, where his howl shattered the foundations of reality. And Fenrir kept growing. His paws became the size of shields. His teeth became like swords. Each claw could have served as a spear point. His eyes, which had started as normal wolf's eyes, began to glow with a light that had no earthly source. Yellow gold, bright as flame, those eyes watched everything, measured everything, judged everything. He could speak after a fashion, not often. Fenrir was not one for casual conversation, but when he chose to, his voice was like an earthquake given sound. Deep, resonant, carrying undertones that made your bones vibrate and your heart race. The few times he spoke to the assembled gods, demanding more food or better quarters, or simply asking when he would be allowed to leave Asgard, the entire assembly fell silent to listen. But one god did not fear him. One god approached the growing wolf without hesitation, without weapons, without guile. That god was Tyr. From almost the beginning, from when Fenrir was small enough to seem harmless, Tyr had taken an interest in the young wolf. While other gods threw food from a distance, Tyr brought it himself. He would walk across the courtyard, a haunch of meat over his shoulder, and approach Fenrir directly. The wolf would watch him come, those bright eyes tracking every movement, and then Tyr would set down the meat and step back, giving Fenrir space to eat. At first, this was simply practical. Someone had to feed the creature, and if everyone was too afraid to get close, the task fell to whoever was brave enough to volunteer. And Tyr was nothing if not brave. But over time, something more developed. Not friendship exactly. How can a god and a monster be friends but something? A relationship, an understanding. Tyr would stay while Fenrir ate. He would sit nearby, not hovering, not staring, just present. Sometimes he would speak, telling the wolf about the day's events in Asgard, about conflicts among the gods, about news from Midgard. Whether Fenrir understood or cared was unclear, but he never attacked Tyr, never even threatened him. He simply ate his meals and listened to the god's voice. As Fenrir grew larger, this ritual continued. Tyr still brought the food personally, though now it required a cart rather than just his own strength to transport. He still sat with the wolf while he ate, and occasionally, when Fenrir was in a rare communicative mood, they would talk. These conversations, if they could be called that, were brief and strange. Fenrir would ask about the world beyond Asgard, about Midgard and Jotunheim, about the forests and mountains and seas he had never been allowed to explore. Tyr answered honestly, describing the places he had seen, the battles he had fought, the world that existed beyond the golden walls that confined the wolf. And sometimes Fenrir would ask about the prophecies. He knew, of course. Loki had told him before he was taken from his mother. Fenrir knew that he was destined to kill Odin, that he would help bring about Ragnarok, that he was, in the eyes of the gods, not just a creature but a doom, a walking apocalypse waiting to happen. Tyr never lied to him about this. He did not try to soften the truth or pretend the prophecies did not exist. He simply acknowledged them. Yes, the seers said Fenrir would devour Odin. Yes, the gods feared him. Yes, that was why he was kept here, watched constantly, never allowed to roam free. And Fenrir would tilt his massive head, those glowing eyes fixed on Tyr, and ask the obvious question. If I am destined to kill your all-father, if I am doomed to be your enemy, why do you treat me with respect? Why do you come here day after day? Why do you speak to me as though I am something other than a monster? Tyr's answer was always the same. Because you have done nothing wrong yet. Because prophecy is not crime. Because you deserve to be treated justly, regardless of what the future may hold. It was this, more than anything else, that distinguished Tyr from the other gods. The others saw Fenrir as the prophecies defined him, a threat, a monster, a doom to be feared and eventually neutralized. But Tyr saw him as he was in the present moment, a creature who had been given no choice in his creation, no say in his destiny, and who deserved at minimum to be treated with honor until he actually did something to merit punishment. This was Tyr's justice. Not the justice of preemptive strikes and collective punishment, not the justice of condemning someone for what they might do, but the justice of treating each being according to their actions, not their potential futures. The justice of maintaining standards, even when it would be easier, safer, more practical to abandon them. And Fenrir, in his way, understood this. He understood that Tyr alone among all the Æsir looked at him and saw something other than a prophecy made flesh. And that understanding created a bond. Fragile, strange, doomed, like all things in Norse mythology, but real nonetheless. The other gods began to talk. Why did Tyr spend so much time with the wolf? Was he trying to befriend him, to create some leverage for when the prophecy began to unfold? Was he studying Fenrir, learning his habits, looking for weaknesses? Or was it simpler than that? Was Tyr simply doing what he always did, fulfilling his duty without complaint, taking on the unpleasant task no one else wanted? Probably all of these things. Probably none. Tyr did not explain himself to the others. He simply continued his daily visits to Fenrir, bringing food, sitting, talking, maintaining, for as long as possible, the principle that even a monster deserved to be treated justly. And Fenrir grew and grew, until the day came when even Tyr could no longer deny what was obvious to everyone else. The wolf had become too dangerous. He was too large, too powerful, too threatening. Something had to be done. The council was held in Odin's hall. All the major gods attended. Thor was there, hammer across his lap, ready as always for violence if it came to that. Odin sat in his high seat, his one eye dark and thoughtful. Frigg attended, and Freya and Heimdall, and Baldur the Beautiful and all the others. The air was tense, and Tyr stood in the back, arms crossed, knowing what was coming, knowing he could not stop it, knowing even that he should not stop it, because as much as he respected Fenrir, as much as he believed in treating the wolf justly, he could not deny the reality. Fenrir was growing without limit. The prophecies hung over everything like a storm cloud, and sooner or later, choice or no choice, destiny or no destiny, Fenrir would become the threat everyone feared. The decision was made. They would bind him. They would create chains strong enough to hold the wolf, and they would imprison him until Ragnarok, until the appointed time. It was not what anyone wanted. It was simply what had to be done. And Tyr said nothing. He did not object. He did not argue. Because in his heart, in the part of him that was the God of justice and law, he knew this was necessary. He hated it, but he accepted it. He simply asked for one thing, that when the time came, when they took the chains to Fenrir, Tyr would be there. He would be the one to stand before the wolf and explain what was happening. He owed Fenrir that much. After all their talks, after all those days of feeding him and sitting with him, he owed him honesty at the end. The other gods agreed. Of course Tyr would be there. Someone had to approach the wolf, and Tyr was the only one Fenrir might listen to, the only one who had any chance of getting close enough to actually bind him. So the trap was set, the chains were forged, and Tyr prepared himself for the betrayal he was about to commit, the breaking of the unspoken trust between himself and the wolf, the moment when he would prove himself, in Fenrir's eyes at least, no different from all the other gods who saw only a monster. It was in its way the death of something, not Fenrir. The wolf would live on, bound and furious, waiting for Ragnarok, but the death of the relationship between the god and the wolf. The death of the possibility that things could have been different. The death of the hope, however faint, that Fenrir could have been something other than what prophecy demanded he become. And Tyr mourned that death, quietly, in the way he mourned all things. With silence, with acceptance, with the grim understanding that sometimes doing what is right means destroying what is good. Why did Tyr alone dare to go near Fenrir? The myths do not say explicitly, but we can imagine. Perhaps he saw in the creature not just a monster, but a being deserving of honor. Perhaps his sense of duty demanded it. Someone had to care for the wolf, and if others were too afraid, then it fell to him. Perhaps, just perhaps, he even pitied Fenrir, this monstrous child raised by those who feared and distrusted him, never given a chance to be anything other than the doom prophecy had declared him to be. Why did Tyr alone dare to go near Fenrir? The myths do not say explicitly, but we can imagine. Perhaps he saw in the creature not just a monster, but a being deserving of honor. Perhaps his sense of duty demanded it. Someone had to care for the wolf, and if others were too afraid, then it fell to him. Perhaps, just perhaps, he even pitied Fenrir, this monstrous child raised by those who feared and distrusted him, never given a chance to be anything other than the doom prophecy had declared him to be. Whatever the reason, Tyr fed Fenrir. Day after day he brought the wolf food, and in doing so a bond formed. Not quite friendship, gods and monsters do not become friends, but something. Recognition, perhaps. Respect. Fenrir, who trusted none of the Æsir, who could smell their fear and deceit, allowed Tyr to approach. And Tyr, who knew what the prophecies said about this wolf, who knew that Fenrir was fated to bring about the deaths of gods and the end of the world, continued to feed him anyway. Because that is what Tyr did. He fulfilled his obligations, he kept his word, even to a monster, even when no one was watching, even when it gained him nothing but the companionship of a creature destined for his enemies. And Fenrir grew, and grew, and grew. Until the day came when the gods could no longer pretend he was just an unusual pet, just an interesting curiosity. The day came when they looked at Fenrir and saw death walking on four paws, saw the end of everything they had built, saw the doom that was coming for them, and they decided, as gods so often do when they are afraid, that they had to act. They had to stop this, they had to bind him. But how do you bind a wolf who grows stronger every day? How do you chain a creature who can snap iron like kindling? And more importantly, how do you do it without him knowing what you're doing until it's too late? The gods were clever, they were cunning, and they had Odin, the god of tricks and stratagems, to guide them. They came up with a plan. They would tell Fenrir it was a game. Picture the scene. The gods gather in one of Asgard's great courtyards. The sun shines overhead, bright and warm. There is an atmosphere of false cheer, forced joviality. The gods smile too widely. They laugh too loudly. And in the center of it all, Fenrir sits, massive and watchful, his golden eyes taking in everything. The gods have brought chains, huge heavy chains, wrought from the finest iron, each link thick as a man's waist. These are not just restraints, these are works of art, of metalcraft. The gods present them to Fenrir, a game, they tell him, a simple test of strength. We have these chains and we are curious. How strong are you really, Fenrir? Could you break these? Would you care to try? Fenrir looks at the chains. He looks at the gods. He is not stupid. He is, after all, the son of Loki. Cunning flows in his blood. But the chains are right there, plain to see, and the challenge is straightforward. If there is treachery here, it is well hidden. Besides, Fenrir is confident. He has grown powerful beyond measure. He is the mightiest creature in Asgard, stronger than any god, faster than any deer, more fearsome than any monster. Why would he fear chains? So he agrees. The gods approach carefully, respectfully even, and they wrap the chains around him. Massive iron links encircle his body, his legs. They loop and overlap, layer upon layer, until Fenrir looks like he's wearing armor made of metal. The chains are so heavy that 3 gods stagger under the weight of just one section. The gods step back, they watch, they wait. Fenrir takes a breath, then he flexes. His muscles bunch and release, the chains strain, the metal groans, and then with a sound like thunder, they shatter. Fragments of iron scatter across the courtyard. Fenrir shakes himself, and broken links fall from his fur like rain. The gods applaud, they cheer. Well done, Fenrir, magnificent. We have never seen such strength. And they are not entirely lying. It is magnificent in the way that a forest fire is magnificent, beautiful and terrible at once. But beneath the applause, beneath the smiles, the gods are afraid. Those chains were supposed to be unbreakable, and Fenrir snapped them like twigs. They try again, heavier chains this time. Iron reinforced with bronze, with silver, with every metal the dwarven smiths of Svartalfheim could provide. Chains that took 100 smiths 100 days to forge. Chains blessed by Odin himself, each link inscribed with runes of binding. Again they present it as a game. Even stronger chains this time, Fenrir. Surely these will test you properly. Shall we see if you are as mighty as we believe?" And again, Fenrir agrees. He sits patiently while the gods wrap these even more massive chains around him. It takes a dozen gods to lift them. The weight is so immense that it cracks the stones beneath Fenrir's paws. The gods step back. Fenrir waits a moment, letting the anticipation build. Then he moves. He surges upward, and the chains do not just break. They explode. They disintegrate into powder. Fragments of metal shoot out like projectiles, embedding themselves in walls and pillars. When the dust settles, Fenrir stands free, not even breathing hard, pieces of the supposedly unbreakable chains littering the ground around him like toys. The gods applaud again. But the applause is more nervous now, more frantic, because they are running out of options. And Fenrir is still growing. Every day he grows, and every day the prophecy draws closer to fulfillment. The wolf who will devour Odin, the creature who will help bring about Ragnarok, the doom that walks among them. Odin calls a council. The gods gather in his hall, voices low and urgent. What can be done? How can they stop this? Every chain they create, Fenrir breaks. Every binding they devise, he escapes. At this rate, it is only a matter of time before he is too powerful to even attempt to restrain. Before he decides that he is done, being a curiosity in the court of the Æsir, and turns his teeth toward the gods themselves. Someone suggests they kill him. End it now before it's too late. But that suggestion is quickly shot down. Asgard is sacred ground. No blood can be shed here without polluting the halls of the gods themselves. And besides, Fenrir has done nothing yet. He has not attacked. He has not threatened. To kill him unprovoked would be murder, not justice. And Tyr, silent in the corner, will not allow it. So they decide on another path. They will seek help from the dwarves. The dwarves of Svartalfheim, master craftsmen, creators of Mjolnir and Gungnir, and countless other legendary artifacts. If anyone can create a binding that will hold Fenrir, it is them. Odin sends a messenger. A swift god races down from Asgard, through the branches of Yggdrasil, into the dark and glittering caverns of Svartalfheim, and there, in their forges beneath the earth, the dwarves listen to the god's plea. "Create us a binding," the messenger says, "something that will hold the wolf Fenrir, something he cannot break." The dwarves consider. They stroke their beards, they mutter among themselves, and then they agree. But they warn, what you ask for will not look like what you expect. To bind that which is strong, sometimes you need that which appears weak. To hold fast that which is mighty, sometimes you need that which seems fragile. The dwarves work, for days, for weeks, who can say? Time moves strangely in Svartalfheim. They gather ingredients, not iron, not bronze, not any metal at all. They gather things that should not exist. The sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, the spit of a bird. Impossible things, things that do not exist in the waking world. But the dwarves are master craftsmen, and they work with more than mere matter. They work with the fabric of reality itself. They weave these impossible ingredients together, and what they create is called Gleipnir. Gleipnir looks like a ribbon, silken, smooth, soft to the touch. It is light as air, thin as a thread. You could drape it over your hand and barely feel its weight. It looks, in short, like nothing at all, like something a child might use to tie back their hair. But Gleipnir is unbreakable. Because it is made from impossibilities, it cannot be overcome by any force that exists in the possible world. Fenrir's strength is great, but it is the strength of sinew and bone and muscle. Gleipnir is the strength of things that should not be, and the two are not even in the same category. The messenger returns to Asgard bearing Gleipnir. The gods examine it skeptically. This is it? This thin ribbon is supposed to hold the wolf that broke chains of enchanted iron, but the dwarves have never failed before, and the gods are desperate, so they decide to try. They decide to take Fenrir to a remote place away from Asgard proper, to an island in a lake, a place called Lyngvi, overgrown with heather, a place where, if something goes wrong, at least the devastation will be limited, and they present it to Fenrir as one more game. The gods arrive at Lyngvi in a procession. Odin leads, the Allfather himself staff in hand. Thor walks beside him, Mjolnir hanging from his belt. Freya and Heimdall and Bragi and all the others, a delegation of divine power, and Tyr, always Tyr, quiet and steady, and Fenrir. The wolf comes willingly. Why would he not? This has been their game for some time now. The gods bring chains. Fenrir breaks them. Everyone applauds. It is strange, perhaps, but Fenrir has no reason yet to suspect betrayal. After all, if they meant him harm, why would they have kept him in Asgard all this time? Why would Tyr have fed him personally, day after day? They reach the island. The heather sways in the wind. The sky overhead is grey, and the air has that particular tension that precedes storms. The gods spread out in a loose circle, and in the center, Fenrir waits. Odin steps forward. He holds up Gleipnir. See this, Fenrir. We have brought you one more test. This was made by the dwarves, and they claim no force in the 9 realms can break it. But we think they're exaggerating. We think you could snap it easily. What do you say? Would you like to try? Fenrir looks at the ribbon. It looks ridiculous, fragile, barely there. He could break that with a single claw, surely. But something feels wrong. Something about the way the gods are standing, the way they are watching him, the way Odin's voice sounds just a little too cheerful, a little too forced. Fenrir has grown up among gods. He knows what their fear smells like, and he smells it now. He looks at Gleipnir more carefully. It is thin, yes. Light, yes. But there is something about it. A shimmer. A quality he cannot quite name. His instincts, sharp as they are, scream warning. This is not like the other chains. This is something else. Fenrir speaks. His voice, when he uses it, is deep and rumbling, a sound that seems to come from the earth itself. If this is just a game, he says, if you truly believe I can break this ribbon as easily as I broke the others, then prove it. Place one of your hands in my mouth while you bind me, as a pledge of good faith, as proof that you will release me if I ask. The gods freeze. This is the question they feared. This is the moment where their deception will be revealed, because of course they have no intention of releasing Fenrir if Gleipnir holds. That is the entire point. They are not here to test his strength. They are here to imprison him forever, but to refuse Fenrir's demand is to admit the trap, and if they do that, Fenrir will not cooperate. He will fight, and gods will die. Perhaps Fenrir will die too, but not before doing immense damage. Not before the prophecy begins to unfold ahead of schedule. So the gods look at each other. None of them wants to do it. To place a hand in Fenrir's mouth is to guarantee losing that hand. When Fenrir realizes they have betrayed him, he will bite down. That much is certain. So, who will make the sacrifice? Who will lose a hand so that the cosmos can be saved? Odin will not do it. He has already given an eye for wisdom. He cannot afford to give a hand for expediency. Thor will not do it. He needs both hands to wield Mjolnir. Freya will not do it, nor Heimdall, nor any of the others. They all have reasons, all have excuses. But Tyr does not hesitate. He steps forward. He walks toward Fenrir, and the other gods make way for him. This is the god of war and justice. This is the god who has fed Fenrir since he was a pup. This is the only god Fenrir even partially trusts, and Tyr understands what he is about to do. He understands that this is betrayal. Fenrir asked for a pledge of good faith, and Tyr is going to give it, knowing full well that the faith is false, knowing that the gods have no intention of keeping their implied promise, knowing that he is about to become complicit in a lie. But Tyr also understands something else. The alternative is worse. If Fenrir is not bound, he will eventually fulfill the prophecy. He will devour Odin. He will help bring about Ragnarok. The cosmos will end in fire and ice and blood. Every living thing, god and mortal alike, will perish. And so Tyr makes his choice. He chooses the lesser evil. He chooses to break the oath, to participate in the deception, to save the world at the cost of his own honor. He looks at Fenrir. The wolf looks back. For a long moment they simply regard each other. Then Tyr extends his right hand, slowly, deliberately. He reaches toward Fenrir's massive jaws. Fenrir opens his mouth. His teeth are like swords, sharp and gleaming. His mouth could swallow a man whole, and Tyr places his hand inside. He rests it gently on Fenrir's lower jaw, between those terrible teeth. The hand that has wielded swords. The hand that has sworn countless oaths. the hand of the god of justice himself. It is perhaps the most intimate moment of trust and betrayal in all of Norse mythology. Tyr's hand, warm and alive, resting in the mouth of the wolf. Fenrir, keeping his jaws open, holding perfectly still, honoring the agreement. And the other gods, moving quickly now, wrapping Gleipnir around Fenrir's body. The ribbon goes on easily. It barely seems to touch him. The gods wind it around his legs, his torso. They loop it and knot it, their hands moving with practiced precision. And all the while Tyr stands there, his hand in the wolf's mouth, his eyes never leaving Fenrir's. Then the gods step back, and they wait. Fenrir tries to move. He flexes his muscles, expecting the ribbon to snap instantly, but it does not. He pulls harder. Gleipnir does not even strain. He thrashes, throwing all his immense strength against the binding. The ground shakes, trees on the island bend, but Gleipnir holds. Fenrir understands. He has been tricked, trapped, imprisoned. These gods he allowed near him, these beings he almost began to trust, have betrayed him. The game was never a game, it was always a trap, and they used his own pride, his own confidence, to spring it. Rage floods through him, rage and hurt and a terrible, bitter disappointment. He looks at Tyr. Tyr who fed him, Tyr who he thought was different from the others, Tyr whose hand is still resting between his teeth, and the gods are laughing, not nervously now, not uncomfortably. They are laughing with relief, with triumph. They have done it, they have bound the wolf. Ragnarok is averted, or at least delayed. The prophecy is thwarted. They are safe, and in their relief and their joy at survival, they laugh. All except one. Tyr does not laugh. Tyr simply stands there, his face grave, his hand still in the wolf's mouth, waiting, because he knows what is coming. He made a promise, false though it was, and Fenrir is going to collect the only payment left to take. Their eyes meet one more time, god and wolf, honor and betrayal, trust and broken faith, and in Fenrir's eyes, Tyr sees something he will carry for the rest of his existence. Not just rage, not just pain, but understanding. Fenrir understands why Tyr did it. He understands the choice that was made, and he does not forgive. Fenrir's jaws close, slowly at first, giving Tyr every chance to pull away, but Tyr does not pull away. He accepts this. He stands firm, and when Fenrir's teeth meet through flesh and bone, when the god's hand severs cleanly at the wrist, Tyr does not cry out. He does not scream. He makes no sound at all. Blood wells. Blood flows. Tyr pulls back his arm, now ending in a stump, and he wraps it in cloth from his cloak. His face is pale, but steady, and around him, the laughter of the gods has stopped. They watch in silence as Tyr turns and walks away from the bound wolf. As he returns to them maimed but unbowed, having paid the price their deception demanded. And on the island Fenrir remains, bound by Gleipnir, the ribbon that looks like nothing but holds like everything. His mouth is open and foam begins to drip from his jaws. Foam tinged with blood, foam that will flow and flow, becoming a river called Van, the river of expectation. Because Fenrir waits. He waits for Ragnarok. He waits for the day when the bonds will break and he will be free. And when that day comes, he will remember. He will remember the gods who imprisoned him. He will remember the hand in his mouth. He will remember Tyr. The gods take a sword, presumably one they brought for this purpose, and they wedge it into Fenrir's jaws, propping them open so he cannot bite. The river of foam flows faster, and they tie Gleipnir to a massive boulder called Gjoll, buried deep in the earth. A chain runs from the ribbon to the boulder, and then from the boulder to an even larger rock called Thviti, driven down like a stake into the bedrock of the world. Fenrir is not just bound, he is anchored to the very bones of the earth. And there he will remain until the end, until the day when the sun and moon are devoured, until the day when Yggdrasil trembles, until Ragnarok comes and Gleipnir finally breaks. The gods leave the island. They return to Asgard, subdued now, the earlier joy faded. They have saved themselves, yes, but the cost is starting to become clear. They have betrayed an oath. They have committed a deception. And Tyr, their god of law and justice, has lost his sword hand to make that betrayal legal. The journey back is quiet. No one speaks much. Thor grips Mjolnir tightly as though expecting an attack. Odin stares ahead, his one eye distant, already calculating the implications of what they have done. And Tyr walks among them, his stump wrapped in cloth now soaked through with blood, his face pale but composed. When they reach Asgard, Tyr goes immediately to his hall. He does not seek out healers, though they come to him anyway. There is little they can do. The wound is clean, already starting to close with the remarkable resilience of divine flesh. But the hand itself is gone, consumed by Fenrir, and no magic can restore what the wolf has taken. The healers wrap the stump properly, apply salves and ointments that will prevent infection, though gods rarely suffer from such mortal concerns. They offer sympathy, carefully worded, uncertain how to comfort a god who has just sacrificed part of himself for the greater good. Tyr accepts their ministrations with quiet gratitude and sends them away as soon as they are finished. Alone in his hall, Tyr finally allows himself to feel the full weight of what has happened. He flexes the muscles in his right arm, and phantom sensations ghost through where his hand used to be. He can still feel his fingers, though they are not there. Can still sense them curling into a fist, though there is only empty air. This will fade in time, he knows. The phantom sensations will diminish. But for now, they are a constant reminder of what he has lost. He picks up a sword with his left hand. It feels wrong. The balance is off. His left hand is skilled enough, certainly. He has trained with both hands as any warrior should. But his right hand was his sword hand, his dominant hand. The hand that knew instinctively how to strike, how to parry, how to move through the complex dance of combat without thinking. All that muscle memory, all that practiced skill, is useless now. He tries a few practice swings. Awkward, slow. His timing is off. His reach is different than he expects. He imagines facing an enemy in battle now, trying to defend himself or others with this unfamiliar grip, this diminished capability. He imagines the moment of hesitation that could mean death. But then again, Tyr thinks, death comes for everyone eventually, even gods. Ragnarok will see to that. And perhaps it is fitting that the god of war should be diminished as a warrior. Perhaps there is a lesson in this. That true strength is not in the sword arm, but in the principles you uphold. That justice does not require physical might. That law transcends violence. These are cold comforts, philosophical consolations that do not quite reach the place where loss lives. But they are something, and Tyr has never been one to wallow in misery. He sets down the sword. He will adapt. He will learn to fight with his left hand. It will take time, but time is something he has, at least until Ragnarok. In the days and weeks that follow, Tyr's sacrifice becomes the talk of Asgard. Some gods speak of it with admiration. The bravest among us, they say, the most honorable. He did what none of us would do. Others are more quiet in their assessment. They do not quite meet Tyr's eye when they pass him in the halls. Perhaps they feel guilty. Perhaps they are relieved it was not them. Perhaps they wonder if there was another way, some path they did not see, where Fenrir could have been bound without this terrible cost. And some, a very few, whisper criticism. Was it necessary? Did Tyr have to give his hand? Couldn't the gods have simply refused Fenrir's demand and forced the binding anyway? They are stronger than the wolf, after all. They could have used magic, could have overwhelmed him with numbers. But these whispers never reach Tyr's ears, or if they do, he does not acknowledge them, because he knows what the critics do not understand or choose not to. Force alone would not have worked. Fenrir would have fought. Gods would have died. And even if they had succeeded in binding him, even if they had wrestled him down and wrapped Gleipnir around him by sheer strength, the act would have been pure violence. No different from any other conquest, no different from what the giants do when they raid Asgard, what monsters do when they attack the innocent. Tyr's hand made it legal, made it just, made it something other than mere cruelty. That was the point. That was always the point. And the cost was his alone to bear, as it should be, because he was the god of justice, and if anyone should suffer to maintain the cosmic order, it should be the one whose very nature was bound up in that order. Odin summons Tyr to his high seat a few days after the binding. The All-Father sits in his place of power, his ravens Hugin and Munin perched on the arms of his throne. His one eye fixes on Tyr with an intensity that is difficult to meet. "You did well," Odin says simply. "The wolf is bound. The prophecy is delayed. You have bought us time." Tyr nods. He does not feel the need to respond. Odin's praise is not why he did what he did. "But you should know," Odin continues. And now there is something darker in his voice, something that sounds almost like regret. "That Fenrir will remember. When Ragnarok comes, when the bonds break, he will remember who stood before him, who put their hand in his mouth, who kept him imprisoned all these ages." "I know," Tyr says quietly. "He will come for you," Odin says. "Or if not him directly, then the forces of chaos he unleashes. You have made an enemy who will outlast centuries, who will wait with patient hatred until the day he can take his revenge." Tyr meets Odin's eye. "I know," he says again. "But the alternative was to let him devour you tomorrow instead of at Ragnarok, to let him ravage the 9 realms now instead of at the appointed time. This was necessary. The cost was worth it." Odin studies him for a long moment. Then he nods slowly. "You are the only one among us," he says, "who would have done it, the only one who could have. And for that, you have my respect, whatever respect that is worth in the end." It is as close to an apology as Odin is likely to give, an acknowledgement that Tyr has borne a burden for all of them, that his sacrifice has saved not just Odin, but all the Æsir, all the 9 realms, from chaos arriving before its time. Tyr bows slightly and takes his leave. He does not need Odin's respect, though he supposes it is better to have it than not. He needs only to know that he did what was right, that he upheld the law, that he maintained order. Everything else is secondary. But in the deep night, when Asgard sleeps and even the fires in the great halls burn low, Tyr sometimes walks to the edge of the realm. He stands at the place where Bifrost shimmers into existence, where the rainbow bridge arcs down toward Midgard. He looks out across the distance, across the vast space that separates the divine from the mortal, and he thinks about Fenrir. The wolf is out there, bound on his island, foam dripping from his jaws. The river Van flows endlessly, the river of expectation, named for what Fenrir waits for: release, freedom, revenge. Tyr wonders if the wolf dreams, if he closes those bright eyes and sees visions of the future, of Ragnarok, of the moment when Gleipnir finally snaps and he can run again. Does Fenrir hate him? Tyr wonders. Or does the wolf understand? Does some part of Fenrir recognize that Tyr had no choice, that he did what he had to do, that the sacrifice of a hand was the price of upholding law in a universe that demanded such prices? Tyr will never know. There are no more conversations with Fenrir, no more daily visits, no more shared moments of understanding between God and wolf. That chapter is closed, and what remains is only the wait. The long, slow march toward the day when everything they have built will come crashing down. Sometimes Tyr touches the stump of his right arm. The phantom sensations have faded now, as he knew they would. He no longer feels fingers that are not there. The wound has healed completely, leaving only smooth, divine flesh where his hand once was. In a way, this is worse than when it hurt. When it hurt, at least the loss felt real, immediate, present. Now it is simply absence, simply a part of him that is no longer there and never will be again. He has adapted his fighting style. He has trained relentlessly with his left hand until he can wield a spear nearly as well as he once did with his right. Nearly. Not quite. There is a moment of hesitation now when he fights, a fraction of a second where his body wants to use the hand that is gone. Enemies who know his story sometimes try to exploit this, attacking from his right side, forcing him to compensate. It works sometimes, not often, but sometimes. Enough to remind him that he is diminished, but perhaps that was always part of the cost. Perhaps Tyr was always meant to be the diminished god, the one who gave up glory for duty, who sacrificed his own strength for the strength of the cosmic order, who became less so that the universe could remain whole, at least for a little while longer. The other gods honor him in their way. When they drink in the great halls, when they toast to victory and strength and honor, they often pour a drink for Tyr, though he may not be present. They speak his name with respect. They tell the story of the binding of Fenrir to young gods and visiting dignitaries. They make sure that the sacrifice is remembered, that the cost is acknowledged. But none of them truly understand. How could they? They still have both hands. They still have their full strength. They did not stand before Fenrir and feel those jaws close. They did not make the choice that Tyr made, the choice that changed everything. Tyr never gets his hand back. There is no regeneration, no magical healing. Gods can be maimed in Norse mythology, and those wounds last. Odin has only one eye. Heimdall is said to have given up one ear, though the myths are unclear on this point. And Tyr has only one hand. For a god of war, this is devastating. Tyr can no longer wield a sword properly. He can hold a spear in his left hand, but it is awkward. He will never again be the warrior he was. His effectiveness in battle, his strength, his ability to defend the gods and uphold justice through force when necessary, all of it is diminished. But perhaps that was always the point. Perhaps the sacrifice was never just about binding Fenrir. Perhaps it was about demonstrating that law requires sacrifice, that justice cannot be free. That order, the order that keeps the cosmos from falling into chaos, demands a price. And sometimes that price is paid by the very gods who embody the principles they are trying to uphold. Tyr sacrificed his hand, but in doing so, he transformed a dishonorable act into a sacred one. He paid the debt. He balanced the scales. The gods broke their word, yes. But Tyr suffered for that broken word, and in his suffering, the binding became legitimate. It became, in Dumezil's words, regularized. It became law. And that is why Tyr is the god of law and war, because he understood that sometimes, often, upholding the law means personal sacrifice, means suffering, means doing what is necessary even when it costs you everything. In the Elder Futhark, the runic alphabet used by the Germanic peoples long before the Latin alphabet reached them, there is a rune called Tiwaz. It is shaped like an arrow pointing upward. A simple vertical line with two diagonal lines extending downward from the top, like a spear, like a tree, like a symbol of the sky itself. Tiwaz is Tyr's rune. The letter T in the ancient runic script belonged to the god of justice and war, and like the god himself, the rune carried weight far beyond its simple appearance. Warriors carved Tiwaz onto their weapons, swords, spears, shields. Archaeological excavations have uncovered these artifacts, metal etched with the upward-pointing arrow, silent prayers for victory and justice. When a warrior went into battle with Tiwaz carved into his blade, he was not just carrying a weapon, he was carrying the blessing of the god who ensured that righteous causes prevailed. The rune was more than decoration. It was magic. Or perhaps more accurately, it was a statement of intent. To carve Tiwaz was to invoke Tyr, to call upon his principles, to declare that you fought not for glory alone, not for plunder or rage, but for something more, for law, for order, for justice. For, in the poetic Edda, the Valkyrie Sigurdrifa instructs the hero Sigurd in the use of victory runes. She tells him, in a passage that has echoed down through the centuries, to carve victory runes on his sword and call twice upon Tyr. Not once, but twice. Double emphasis. Double invocation. Because Tyr was the god who granted victory when victory was deserved. Some scholars have debated whether these victory runes are literal or metaphorical. Did warriors actually carve specific runes, or is this poetic language describing something more abstract? But we have the archaeological evidence. We have weapons with runes, we have inscriptions. The practice was real even if the exact meanings and methods have been lost to time. The Tiwaz rune represents more than just victory, though. It represents sacrifice. The arrow pointing up is also an arm pointing down. It is Tyr's hand, forever absent, forever given. When you looked at that rune, you were reminded of what justice costs, of what duty demands, of the god who gave his sword hand so that the cosmos would endure. In Old English, the rune poem, a mnemonic device that helped people remember the runes and their meanings, has an entry for Tyr, the Old English equivalent of Tyr. It says, "Tyr is a sign that keeps faith well with noblemen. It is always on course over the mists of night and never fails. Always on course over the mists of night." What a beautiful image. The North Star, constant and unwavering, guiding travelers through darkness. That is Tyr. That is what he represents, the fixed point, the reliable constant, the one thing you can count on when everything else is uncertain. The Icelandic rune poem is even more explicit. It says, Tyr is the one-handed among the Æsir, the leavings of the wolf and the prince of temples. The leavings of the wolf. What a brutal, visceral way to describe Tyr's sacrifice. Not a noble loss in battle, not a heroic wound, just leavings. What the wolf left behind after taking what it wanted. And yet, even in that brutal description, there is honor. The prince of temples, the one who is worshipped, who is revered, despite or perhaps because of what he has lost. The Norwegian rune poem is simpler. Tyr is the one-handed god and the leavings of the wolf and the god of temples. Same themes, same unflinching acknowledgement of the sacrifice. The Norse did not shy away from these things. They did not romanticize suffering or pretend that heroism was painless. Tyr lost his hand. That was the fact, and that fact mattered. It defined him. The rune Tiwaz appears in inscriptions across Scandinavia, Britain, and parts of continental Europe. Anywhere the Germanic peoples settled, you can find traces of Tyr's influence. Sometimes the rune appears alone, a simple invocation. Sometimes it appears in combination with other runes, part of longer inscriptions whose meanings we can only guess at. One particularly interesting find is a bracteate, a thin gold disc worn as an amulet or pendant from around 500 CE. It shows an image of a god, possibly Tyr, and includes several Tiwaz runes stacked on top of each other. 3 of them, arranged to look like a small tree or a spear. Scholars believe this was a particularly powerful invocation, a way of tripling the rune's effect. Victory upon victory upon victory, justice upon justice upon justice. Place names also preserve Tyr's memory. In Denmark there are several locations called Tislund, meaning Tyr's grove. Sacred spaces, perhaps, where people once gathered to honor the god. In Norway, there is Tisnes, Tyr's Peninsula, and Tisnesu, Tyr's Island. These names are old, dating back centuries, persisting even after Christianity replaced the old gods. The very day of the week preserves his name. Tuesday. From Old English Tirsdag, Tuesday. In Old Norse, Tisdager. In Swedish, Tisdag. In Danish, Tirsdag. Every Tuesday, whether you know it or not, you are speaking the name of the one-handed god. You are invoking, in the most casual way possible, a deity who predates Jesus by millennia. The Romans had Dies Martis, the day of Mars. When Germanic peoples adopted the Roman week system, they translated rather than borrowed. Mars became Tyr. The equation was clear. The god of war and justice, the god who presided over oaths and battles. Tuesday belonged to him. This is the quiet power of Tyr. He does not dominate the myths the way Odin does. He does not have Thor's thunder or Loki's mischief, but he persists. In names, in runes, in the everyday language we use without thinking, he is woven into the fabric of culture so deeply that even when his stories are forgotten, his presence remains. The Tiwaz rune is still used today. Modern practitioners of Norse paganism, followers of Æsir and other Reconstructionist religions, use the rune in their rituals and meditations. It represents the same things it always has: justice, honor, sacrifice, the willingness to do what is right even when it costs you dearly. Some people wear the rune as jewelry, a pendant, a ring, a tattoo, a reminder perhaps of the principles they want to embody, or simply an appreciation for the aesthetic, the clean simplicity of that upward-pointing arrow. But there is a dark side to this modern use. Extremist groups, particularly white supremacists and neo-Nazis, have attempted to co-opt Norse symbols, including the Tiwaz rune. They claim a connection to ancient Germanic heritage, twisting the symbols to serve hateful ideologies that the original bearers of those symbols would not have recognized. This is not Tyr's doing, of course. The gods do not control how their symbols are used millennia after their worship has faded, but it is important to note. When you see Tiwaz today, context matters. Is it being used by someone genuinely interested in Norse history and spirituality? Or is it being used as a coded signal for something far uglier? The rune itself is neutral. It is what we make of it. And Tyr, who represented law and order and justice, would likely be appalled to see his symbol used in service of injustice. But gods are silent now, if they ever spoke at all. The only voice left is ours. And we must choose carefully what we do with these inherited symbols. Who was Tyr's mother? Who were his siblings? What did he do when he was not feeding wolves or presiding over legal assemblies? The myths are frustratingly silent on these questions. Tyr exists in the surviving stories almost entirely in relation to his function. He is the god of law and war. He is the one who sacrificed his hand. Beyond that, the details grow murky. Some sources say he was the son of Odin. This would make him a member of the Æsir in good standing, brother to Thor and Balder, and all the other divine offspring of the All-Father. It would place him firmly within the hierarchy of Asgard, a god among gods, honored and respected. But other sources tell a different story. In the poetic Edda in the poem Hymiskvida, Tyr is described as the son of Hymir, a giant. Not just any giant, but a sea giant, ancient and powerful, living at the edge of the world where the ocean meets the sky. In this version, Tyr is half giant, an outsider by blood, connected to the gods by choice rather than birth. Which version is true? The myths do not agree. And perhaps that disagreement itself is telling. Perhaps Tyr's origins were always uncertain. Perhaps his adoption into the Æsir, if that is what happened, was so long ago that even the skalds who preserved the stories no longer knew the truth. If Tyr was Odin's son, it changes the dynamic of the binding of Fenrir slightly. It becomes a father asking his son to make a terrible sacrifice. Odin, who has sacrificed so much himself, who hung on Yggdrasil and gave up his eye, asking Tyr to give up his hand. Does that make it better or worse? Is there comfort in the shared understanding of sacrifice, or does it make the demand more cruel? Imagine that conversation if it happened. Odin calling Tyr to his private chambers, away from the assembled gods. The All-Father, who sees far into future and past, who knows more than any other being in the 9 realms, sitting across from his son. Does he order Tyr to sacrifice his hand? Does he ask? Does he simply state the necessity and trust that Tyr will understand? We do not know. The myths give us the public moment, the assembly, the binding. But what happened in private between father and son, if indeed they were father and son, remains shrouded in silence. If Tyr was Hymir's son, the son of a giant, then his position among the Æsir becomes more complex and perhaps more interesting. He is an outsider who has proven himself so thoroughly that his origin does not matter. He is trusted despite his lineage. Or perhaps because of it. Perhaps the gods needed someone with giant blood to feed Fenrir, to approach the monstrous wolf, without triggering the instinctive hostility that pure-blooded Æsir might provoke. The Hymiskvida tells a strange story, one of the few tales where Tyr appears as more than just a background figure. Thor needs to obtain a massive cauldron for brewing ale, large enough to serve all the gods at a feast. Tyr knows where such a cauldron can be found. It belongs to Hymir, the sea giant, and Tyr volunteers to go with Thor to retrieve it, though he warns that Hymir is not the most welcoming of hosts. They journey to Hymir's hall at the edge of the ocean. The giant's house is vast and cold, hung with weapons and trophies from countless hunts. Hymir himself is ancient, grey-bearded, with eyes as cold and deep as the sea he rules. When Tyr and Thor arrive, Hymir is not pleased to see them. The poem becomes fragmented at this point, but what survives suggests that there was conflict. Thor, never one for subtlety, demands the cauldron. Hymir refuses. There are tests of strength. Thor goes fishing with Hymir and hooks Jormungandr itself, nearly pulling the world serpent from the depths before Hymir, terrified, cuts the line. There is violence, there is trickery, and in the end, Thor gets his cauldron, though not without cost. But what is Tyr's role in all this? The poem suggests he is there as a mediator of sorts, the one who knows Hymir, the one who might be able to negotiate where Thor would only fight. If Hymir is indeed Tyr's father, this adds layers to the story. A son returning to his giant father to ask a favor for the gods, a being torn between 2 worlds, 2 families, 2 sets of loyalties. And Hymir treats Tyr with what might be grudging respect or might be suppressed anger. The text is unclear, but there is a sense that their relationship is complicated, that Tyr choosing the Æsir over his giant heritage was perhaps a betrayal in Hymir's eyes. Or perhaps it was always inevitable. Perhaps Hymir always knew his son belonged with the gods, not with the Jotnar. We do not have enough of the story to know for certain. What we have is tantalizing fragments. A giant who might be Tyre's father, a journey to his hall, a quest for a cauldron. And then the narrative breaks off, leaving us to wonder. Perhaps it does not matter which version of Tyr's parentage is true. Perhaps what matters is that in either case, Tyr is defined not by who his father was, but by what he chose to become. Whether son of Odin or son of Hymir, he is Tyr, the god of law and justice, the one-handed god, the steadfast one. As for siblings, if Tyr is Odin's son, then his family includes some of the most prominent figures in Norse mythology. Thor, the thunderer, strongest of all gods. Baldur, the beautiful, beloved by all before his tragic death. Vidar, the silent one, who will survive Ragnarok and avenge Odin's death. Vali, conceived specifically to avenge Baldur. Hoder, the blind god who unwittingly killed Baldur. Bragi, god of poetry. Heimdall, the watchman, and others, depending on which sources you trust and which relationships you count. If Tyr is Hymir's son, then his siblings are less well documented. Giants have many children, but we know little about Hymir's other offspring. Perhaps there are other half-giant, half-god beings out there in the myths, unnamed or forgotten. Perhaps Tyr has brothers and sisters living in Jotunheim, relatives he never speaks of, connections he has left behind in choosing to serve the Æsir. Either way, we hear almost nothing about Tyr's relationships with his potential siblings. He does not feature in the stories about Thor's adventures, except occasionally as a background presence. He is not part of the tales of Baldur's death and the subsequent attempts to retrieve him from hell. He does not argue with his brothers or compete for their father's favor, if Odin is indeed his father. This absence is striking. Norse mythology is full of family drama, gods feuding with their siblings, children rebelling against parents, spouses seeking revenge for infidelity. The personal relationships between deities drive many of the most famous stories. But Tyr stands apart from all of this. He is somehow outside the family dynamics that define so many other gods. Perhaps this is because his role as god of law requires him to be impartial. How can you judge fairly between gods if you are caught up in their familial squabbles? How can you uphold justice if you are biased by love or hatred for the parties involved? Perhaps Tyr's emotional distance from other gods is not just a quirk of his personality, but a necessary precondition for his function. Or perhaps it is simpler than that. Perhaps the stories of Tyr's family relationships have simply been lost. Perhaps there were once tales of Tyr and Thor going on adventures together, of Tyr mediating disputes between Odin and his other sons, of complex dynamics between the god of law and his divine siblings. But these stories, if they existed, were not written down. They faded from memory, and what remains is only the outline, the function, the sacrifice. We do know a little about Tyr's relationship with other gods from the few stories where he appears. In Lokasenna, the poem where Loki insults everyone at a divine feast, we get a glimpse of how Tyr is perceived by his peers and how he responds to provocation. The scene is Ægir's Hall, where the sea giant hosts a great feast for the gods. Everyone is present. Everyone is drinking. The mood is jovial until Loki, who has been brooding in the corner, decides to ruin everything by airing every god's dirty laundry in public. He goes through them systematically, Loki does. He mocks Odin for his cowardice. He insults Thor's intelligence. He reveals Freya's numerous lovers. He calls out Frigg for her infidelities. He leaves no one unscathed, and the gods, drunk and sluggish, barely respond. They insult him back weakly, but no one does much to stop him. Until Tyr speaks up. When Loki starts mocking Freya, Tyr intervenes. He defends Freya, calling him the best of all brave men, pointing out that Freya brings peace and frees captives. It is a measured defense, not emotional, not aggressive. Just a statement of fact. Freya is worthy of respect. Loki should stop insulting him. Loki, of course, turns on Tyr immediately. He brings up the hand. He brings up Fenrir. And he does so in the cruelest way possible, suggesting that Tyr's sacrifice was pointless, that he is less than whole, that he failed to deal justly, even as he claims to be the god of justice. Tyr's response is brief and cutting. He acknowledges his loss without shame. "I may be missing a hand," he says, "but you are missing Fenrir. Your son is bound." And neither of us is comfortable with what we have lost. It is a powerful moment. Tyr does not try to pretend the loss does not hurt. He does not claim victory or righteousness. He simply points out that both of them have paid a price. Both have sacrificed something, and neither is happy about it. Then Loki shifts his attack, bringing up Tyr's unnamed wife, making vulgar insinuations. Tyr does not respond to this. The poem moves on. We learn nothing more about this wife, if she exists. Perhaps she is a poetic invention. Perhaps Tyr was married, and we simply have no other stories about his spouse. Perhaps Loki is lying or exaggerating, as he often does. What the exchange shows us is how the other gods see Tyr. Even drunk, even in the midst of Loki's scorched earth insult session, Tyr maintains his composure. He defends others. He acknowledges his losses without bitterness. He does not escalate. He is, in short, exactly who he has always been. Steady, just, controlled. But the exchange also shows us something else. It shows us that even among gods, even in Asgard where miracles are commonplace, Tyr's sacrifice is noted. It is seen. Others understand what it cost him. They may not fully appreciate it, may not be willing to make similar sacrifices themselves, but they recognize it. And that recognition, however imperfect, is perhaps all Tyr needs. There are hints in various sources that Tyr had a connection to Zisa, a goddess whose worship was recorded in parts of Germany. Some scholars believe Zisa was Tyr's consort, a goddess of household and hearth who balanced his martial and judicial aspects. But the evidence is thin, the connections speculative. We have a name, a few inscriptions, and very little else. Whether Tyr had a wife, whether he had children, whether he had any personal life beyond his duties, remains unknown. Perhaps he did not. Perhaps Tyr, in choosing to be the embodiment of law and justice, gave up more than just his hand. Perhaps he gave up the possibility of personal attachments, personal concerns, personal desires. Perhaps being the god of impartial justice meant being impartial even about his own life, his own needs, his own happiness. Or perhaps he had a rich family life that simply was not recorded. Perhaps he came home after long days presiding over the thing to a warm hall, a loving wife, children who climbed on his remaining arm and asked him to tell them stories. Perhaps he was not just the god of law, but also a husband, a father, a friend. And perhaps none of this made it into the surviving myths because the skalds who told these stories were interested in drama, in conflict, in sacrifice. The domestic life of a god, however warm and fulfilling, does not make for compelling narrative. We will never know. The silence of the sources is complete on this point, and so Tyr remains what he has always been in our understanding. Solitary, duty-bound, defined entirely by his function and his sacrifice. The one-handed god who stands apart from the family dramas of Asgard, who judges without bias, who upholds the law without regard for personal cost. And maybe that is how it should be. Maybe some figures are meant to be enigmatic. Maybe the god of justice should be somewhat removed from our understanding, should remain slightly out of focus, should refuse to be fully known. Because justice itself is like that. It should be impartial. It should not play favorites. It should stand apart from personal considerations and family loyalties and all the messy, complicated relationships that make us human or make gods divine. Tyr stands apart, and in standing apart, he remains true to what he represents. Clear, uncomplicated, just. Ragnarok, the doom of the gods, the twilight of the powers, the end of everything. The word itself sounds like breaking, like shattering. Ragnarok. 3 syllables that contain multitudes. The death of gods, the destruction of worlds, the unmaking of all that has been carefully, painfully built over countless ages. It is not just an ending, it is the ending. The final chapter written before the universe begins again. The prophecy is well known, spoken of in hushed tones, even in the bright halls of Asgard. The seers have seen it. The Norns, who weave the fates of gods and men, have spoken of it. Odin himself has traveled to the roots of Yggdrasil, has consulted with the dead, has looked into the future with his one far-seeing eye, and he has seen the end. He knows what is coming. They all know. The signs are clear. First comes Fimbulwinter, 3 winters back to back with no summer in between. The sun grows weak. Snow falls without ceasing. Cold seeps into everything, freezing the earth, killing crops, starving the world. This is not just weather. This is the beginning of the end, the universe itself growing cold, preparing for its death. Then the bonds begin to break. Loki, who was punished for his role in Baldur's death, bound beneath the earth with a serpent dripping venom onto his face, breaks free. His bonds snap. He rises, enraged and terrible, and calls the giants to war. His faithful wife Sigyn, who stayed by his side through his imprisonment, holding a bowl to catch the venom, finally leaves. There is nothing more she can do. Fenrir on his island prison feels the tremors, feels the cosmic order beginning to unravel, and Gleipnir, which has held him for so long, which was made from impossible things, finally fails. The ribbon snaps. Fenrir rises. His jaws spread so wide they touch the earth and the sky. He is hunger incarnate, and he begins to run. Jormungandr stirs in his ocean. The world serpent releases his own tail and begins to move, thrashing, poisoning the seas with his venom, sending waves higher than mountains crashing over the lands. Fish die by the thousands, floating to the surface in a carpet of death. The waters turn black and foul. The sky splits. Surtur, the fire giant, ancient and terrible, leads his kin from Muspelheim with his sword that burns like the sun. They ride across the rainbow bridge Bifrost, and their weight shatters it, fragments of color falling into the void below. Never again will mortals and gods walk between worlds. The dead rise from Hell's realm, an army of corpses led by Loki himself. The gods know this day was coming. They have always known. But knowledge does not make it easier. They gather in Asgard one last time. They don their armor. They take up their weapons. And they march out to meet their doom on the plain called Vigrid. The final battle begins. Odin faces Fenrir. Thor confronts Jormungandr. Heimdall and Loki, ancient enemies, find each other in the chaos. Freyr fights Surtur but falls, having given away his sword long ago in a foolish bargain for love. And Tyr, with one hand with a spear held awkwardly in his left grip, goes to face Garmr. Garmr is the Hound of Hell. Some say he is another of Loki's children. Others say he is something older, something that existed before the gods, a creature of primordial chaos that Hell bound to her service. He guards the entrance to the underworld, blood-stained and savage, his howling audible across the 9 realms when he senses souls approaching his mistress's domain. With the bonds breaking, Garmr is free, and like Fenrir, he has waited a very long time for this. He bounds across Vigrid, a creature of nightmare, his jaws snapping, his eyes blazing, and Tyr steps forward to meet him. The myths do not give us details of this fight. They tell us only the outcome. Tyr and Garmr fight. Both die. That is all. No description of the battle. No final words, no heroic last stand. Just the simple statement. They fought. Both perished. Some scholars speculate that Garmr and Fenrir might be the same creature, different names for the same entity in different contexts. If that is true, then Tyr faces the wolf at the end. The wolf whose life he once saved by feeding it. The wolf to whom he gave his hand. The wolf who has waited all these centuries for revenge or perhaps for reunion. But whether Garmr is Fenrir or something else, the result is the same. Tyr dies fighting. He does his duty to the last. He stands against chaos. He upholds order, even as order itself is crumbling. And when he falls with his weapon in hand, with his principles intact. There is no survival for Tyr. Some gods endure Ragnarok. Baldur returns from Hell, resurrected in the new world that will grow from the ashes of the old. Some of Odin's sons and Thor's sons survive, but not Tyr. Tyr is one of the casualties, one of the gods who does not come back. And perhaps that is fitting. Tyr represents the old order, the law that governed the world before Ragnarok. When that world ends, when the cosmic order he spent his existence upholding finally collapses, he goes with it. He does not belong in the new world. He is of the old, and he dies defending it. There is something profoundly sad about this. Tyr, who gave everything, who sacrificed his hand for the sake of the cosmos, does not get to see the world renewed. He does not get vindication or reward, he simply dies, another casualty of a war that was always inevitable. But perhaps there is honor in that too. Tyr was never the type to demand recognition. He did not seek glory. He did not ask for songs to be sung about him. He did his duty because it was his duty, not because he expected anything in return. And when the end came, he did his duty one last time. He stood his ground. He fought the hound of hell. And he died knowing that he had done what he was supposed to do. That is Tyr. That is his character. That is his essence. Duty without reward. Sacrifice without recognition. Steadfastness without hope of victory. And maybe, just maybe, that is the most important kind of heroism there is. Tyr did not leave behind great monuments. He did not have temples to rival Thor's or Odin's. The archaeological record of his worship is sparse. Place names, as we mentioned, a few inscriptions, references in later Christian sources that treat him as a footnote, a lesser deity barely worth mentioning compared to the more prominent Æsir. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because we do not find something does not mean it was never there, and there are hints, scattered traces, that suggest Tyr's worship was once more widespread than the surviving evidence indicates. In Denmark particularly, there seems to have been a significant cult devoted to Tyr. The place names Tislund appear multiple times across Danish territory, suggesting sacred groves where people gathered to honor him. These would have been outdoor sites, places where no permanent structures were built, which would explain why archaeologists have not found temple ruins. The Germanic tribes that the Romans encountered clearly revered Tyr highly. The Interpretatio Romana, the Roman practice of equating foreign gods with their own, placed Tyr alongside Mars. And the inscriptions calling him Mars Thingsus, Mars of the Assembly, indicate that his role as a god of law was well recognized and respected. But something shifted. By the late Viking Age, Tyr had faded. Odin and Thor dominated the religious landscape. Freya and Frigg held prominence among the goddesses. Tyr became a secondary figure, invoked in specific contexts but not central to everyday worship. Why did this happen? Scholars have various theories. Some suggest it was a natural evolution of religious practice. As society changed, as kingdoms consolidated, as warfare became more organized and institutionalized, the qualities Tyr represented might have been subsumed by other gods. Odin became the All-Father, the king of gods, and in doing so, he absorbed some of the sovereign authority that Tyr once held. Thor became the protector, the defender of both gods and humans, taking on some of the martial aspects that Tyr once embodied. Others point to cultural contact. As the Norse encountered other peoples, other religions, ideas cross-pollinated. The Christian concept of God, a supreme deity who combined justice and power and kingship, might have influenced how the Norse thought about their own gods, pushing them to elevate one deity, Odin, over the others. Still others suggest that Tyr's decline is evidence of his great antiquity. He was so old that by the time the myths were being recorded, he belonged to an earlier era. His stories had already been forgotten, replaced by newer tales about newer, or at least newly prominent gods. Whatever the reason, the result is clear. Tyr faded, but he did not disappear. He persists in the language we speak, in the runes we study, in the stories we tell about sacrifice and duty and the cost of justice. Modern practitioners of heathenry, the reconstruction of ancient Norse and Germanic religion, honor Tyr. They invoke him in rituals. They seek his guidance in matters of justice and law. They remember the god who gave his hand, and they try to embody those principles in their own lives. Some see Tyr as particularly relevant to modern concerns about justice and fairness. In a world where legal systems can seem arbitrary or corrupt, where power often trumps right, Tyr represents the ideal of impartial justice, the law that applies equally to all, the willingness to sacrifice personal interest for the greater good. Others connect with the martial aspect of Tyr. Military veterans particularly sometimes honor him as a patron of warriors who fight not for glory but for duty. Soldiers who understand that sometimes you have to do terrible things to protect something important. That war is not glorious, not fun, but sometimes necessary, and that the cost of that necessity is borne by those who fight. But Tyr has also appeared in popular culture. though often in ways that misunderstand or simplify him. Video games feature him as a character. Marvel Comics included him in their Thor series, though their version bears little resemblance to the figure from the myths. Movies and television shows occasionally reference him, usually as a minor god, a supporting character in Thor and Odin's story. These modern portrayals are not necessarily bad. They introduce people to Norse mythology, who might never have encountered it otherwise, but they rarely capture the essence of Tyr, the quiet dignity, the willingness to suffer for principle, the god who gave up his sword hand and then continued to fight anyway, because that is who Tyr is. Not the strongest, not the smartest, not the most powerful or the most glorious, just the most steadfast, the most principled, the one who, when faced with an impossible choice, chose duty over personal welfare, who upheld the law even when doing so cost him dearly, who kept his word or as close to it as possible, even when that word was given to a monster. What does Tyr have to teach us? What relevance does a Norse god from centuries ago have for people today? Perhaps more than you might think, because the core of Tyr's story is not really about gods and wolves. It is about sacrifice, about doing what is necessary even when it hurts, about upholding principles even when it costs you. We live in a world that often values personal success over collective good, that praises those who get ahead, even if they get ahead by stepping on others, that treats law and justice as tools to be manipulated rather than standards to be upheld. We are cynical about duty, skeptical of sacrifice, wary of anyone who claims to act from principle. And maybe that cynicism is earned. Maybe we have been betrayed too often by people who claim to serve justice but really serve themselves. Maybe we have seen too many examples of those in power using the law as a weapon while exempting themselves from it. But Tyr offers a different model. He shows us that integrity is possible, that someone can hold to their principles even when doing so costs them terribly. That duty is not just empty rhetoric, but a real, tangible commitment. Tyr did not have to put his hand in Fenrir's mouth. No one forced him. He could have stayed silent, let someone else make the sacrifice, or let the gods find another way. But he did not. He stepped forward, and when the wolf bit down, Tyr accepted it. He paid the price for the gods' deception. He made the binding legal through his own suffering. There is something profound in that, something that speaks to the deepest questions of how we should live. Because we all face moments, smaller perhaps than binding a world-destroying wolf, where we have to choose between what is easy and what is right, where we have to decide whether to uphold our principles or compromise them, where we have to ask ourselves what we are willing to sacrifice for the things we claim to believe in. Tyr shows us that these sacrifices are not abstractions. They are real, they cost, and they are worth making anyway. He also shows us that heroism does not always look heroic. Tyr's greatest moment is not glorious. He does not win a grand battle. He does not save the day and get cheered by adoring crowds. He puts his hand in a wolf's mouth and loses it. That is his triumph. That is his defining act. And it is quiet and painful and unglamorous. Most real heroism is like that. It is the parent who works 3 jobs to feed their kids, the whistleblower who reports corruption and loses their career, the soldier who throws themselves on a grenade, the activist who speaks truth to power and gets arrested, the person who does the right thing knowing full well it will cost them. These are Tyr's children, in a sense. People who understand that sometimes, often, doing what is right means suffering. And they do it anyway. Tyr also reminds us that law and justice are not the same thing. The gods who bound Fenrir committed a legal act, but only because Tyr paid the price for it. Without his sacrifice, it would have been pure fraud. The form was observed, but only because Tyr willingly absorbed the cost of breaking the spirit of the agreement. How often do we see this in our own world? Laws that are technically legal but deeply unjust, systems that follow procedure while producing terrible outcomes. The letter of the law used as a cudgel against those the law was supposedly meant to protect. Tyr's sacrifice shows us that true justice requires more than just following rules. It requires someone to care about those rules, to uphold them, not because they have to, but because they believe in what those rules represent. It requires sometimes someone willing to suffer, so that the rules themselves do not become meaningless. And finally, Tyr shows us that the cost of order is borne by those who maintain it. The gods benefited from Fenrir's binding. All of them. The entire cosmos was saved from the wolf's rampage, at least temporarily. But only Tyr paid the price. Only he suffered the physical maiming. The others walked away whole. This is a pattern we see over and over in society. Police officers, firefighters, social workers, teachers. People who uphold the order we all depend on, who keep civilization running, and who pay the cost in stress, in trauma, in health, in life itself. While the rest of us benefit from their sacrifice, often without even noticing it, let alone acknowledging it. Tyr is their god, the god of those who do necessary work for insufficient reward, who sacrifice for others and get at best a quiet nod of respect, who keep their oaths and uphold their duties because someone has to, and they have accepted that burden. In this sense, Tyr is more relevant now than ever. We live in an age that desperately needs people willing to make sacrifices for the common good. That needs people who will uphold standards even when it costs them. That needs, in short, a little more of what Tyr represents. Not the violence, not the war, but the steadfastness, the integrity, the willingness to say, this is wrong and I will stand against it no matter what it costs me personally. It is late now, or perhaps early, depending on where you are. The story is nearly told. We have walked with Tyr from his ancient origins to his final battle. We have seen him sacrifice his hand and uphold the law and die fighting the hound of hell. We have traced his name through languages and cultures, found his rune carved on weapons, heard his day of the week echo in our calendars. And through it all, one thing remains constant. Tyr is quiet. He does not shout, he does not demand attention. He simply stands there, one-handed and steadfast, doing his duty. There are no great temples to Tyr today, no pilgrimages to sacred sites. He is not the god who draws crowds or inspires fervent devotion. He is, as he has perhaps always been, the god in the background, the steady presence, the foundation that allows more dramatic gods to have their adventures. But foundations matter. Without them, everything collapses. And that is Tyr's gift to the cosmos. He holds it up. He keeps it steady. He ensures that there is a framework, a structure, a law that governs how things work. And he pays the cost of maintaining that framework himself, without complaint, without hesitation. In a world of thunder and tricks, of shapeshifters and seducers, of gods who throw lightning and ride eight-legged horses, Tyr is the still point, the axis around which everything else turns. He does not move because he does not need to move. He is already where he needs to be, standing at the intersection of war and law, force and principle, violence and justice. He represents something we have perhaps lost sight of in the modern world, the idea that duty is not just a word, but a living commitment, that some things are worth sacrificing for, even when no one will thank you. That maintaining order is a sacred trust, not to be taken lightly, not to be abandoned when it becomes inconvenient. Think of him now, as you lie in the dark, drifting toward sleep. Think of the one-handed God. Think of what he gave. Think of what he represents. And maybe, just maybe, think about what you would be willing to sacrifice for the things you believe in. Because that is what Tyr asks of us. Not worship, not prayer, not ritual, just the question. What matters to you? What are you willing to give up to protect it? What principles would you uphold even when upholding them costs you dearly? These are hard questions. They do not have easy answers. But Tyr did not promise easy. He promised only that it would be worth it, that the sacrifice would mean something, that doing the right thing, even when it hurt, was better than the alternative. And in the end, that may be all we can hope for. Not that our sacrifices will be recognized or rewarded, not that we will be celebrated or remembered, just that we did what needed to be done, that we kept our word, that we stood for something. Tyr stands for that. The god of war and justice, the one-handed god, the quiet one. He stands there still, in myth and memory, a reminder of what we could be if we were brave enough, principled enough, strong enough to give up part of ourselves for something greater. The ancient Norse understood something we often forget, that heroes are not always the loudest voices, not always the strongest warriors, not always the ones who get the songs and the glory. Sometimes heroes are the quiet ones, the ones who do their duty without fanfare, the ones who sacrifice without demanding recognition, the ones who maintain order simply because order must be maintained and someone has to do it. Tyr is that hero, the unsung protector, the silent guardian, the god who gave his hand so that chaos would not consume the cosmos. At least not yet. At least not today. And in a universe where everything is temporary, where even gods can die, maybe that is the most we can ask. To delay the end, to maintain order for as long as possible, to do our duty even when we know it will not last forever. So sleep now if sleep will come. Let Tyr watch over your dreams. Let his quiet strength seep into your bones. Let his example guide you when morning comes and you face your own wolves, your own choices, your own moments where duty and desire clash. And remember when the time comes, what the one-handed God showed us. That true strength is not in never losing. It is in choosing to fight anyway. True justice is not in perfect outcomes. It is in holding to your principles when it would be easier not to. And true heroism is not glory. It is duty. It is sacrifice. It is doing what must be done because someone must do it. And you, quietly, steadfastly, do it anyway. If this story brought you peace, if it gave you something to think about as you drift off to sleep, please like the video and subscribe for more journeys into mythology and legend. And let me know in the comments where you are in the world and what time it is for you. There is something comforting about knowing that others are listening to these same old stories, scattered across the globe, connected by myths that have outlived empires. Until next time, sleep well. And remember Tyr, the god who gave his hand for order, the god who kept his oath, the god who died doing his duty, the quiet god, the steadfast god, the one who reminds us that some things are worth fighting for, worth suffering for, worth giving up everything for. Good night. And may you find in your dreams the courage Tyr showed when he placed his hand in the wolf's mouth, the courage to sacrifice when necessary, the courage to stand for what is right, the courage to be, even in small ways, a little more like the one-handed God. Sleep now. The story is told.